Everyone thinks that the reason that someone pulls away from them is due to some compatibility issue in the relationship. Most of the time, that's wrong. It's usually because of mismatched expectations. This is a Reddit post that I dug up from about 3 years ago on Reddit dating. You can see here that the poster is asking men for the real reasons people pull away in relationships. Now look at some of the answers. They don't put equal effort into the relationship, a lack of reciprocity, withholding intimacy, a need for validation. Each one of these ties into this idea of mismatched expectations. For equal effort, usually you have one partner who believes that both should contribute equally to the relationship in terms of time, energy, emotional support, finances, you name it. For lack of reciprocity, you have one partner who might expect a reciprocal action when they perform a gesture of love, while the other might not recognize or prioritize this exchange. For withholding intimacy, one partner might expect regular physical closeness and affection as a core part of the relationship, while the other might value emotional intimacy more or may have different needs regarding physical closeness. And then, of course, we have a need for validation. One person requires more verbal reassurance, compliments, or affirmations to feel secure than the other is used to given. Now, the other person might not have grown up in an environment where this was normal at all. But we really haven't even touched on the real problem. See, what typically happens in these situations where your person pulls away from you is that you kind of go into panic mode and try to fix it by doubling down on the one thing that's always worked for you before, showing them more love. Here's how that typically goes. They pull away, you get them a gift, hoping that that brings them closer to you. They pull away, you try to tell them your feelings. They pull away, you try to apologize, even though you haven't done anything wrong. Are you noticing an interesting trend here? No? All right, take a look a little bit closer. You have the person pushing you away here. Now, them doing that is essentially a nonverbal message that they're trying to deliver to you. Leave me alone. Then we have you here, trying desperately to fix things by essentially chasing them. You're communicating usually more directly, but there's a disconnect. In other words, there are mismatched expectations. But honestly, that's not the worrying part. There's a trend I've been noticing a lot lately. What everyone seems to miss about the topic of people pulling away is the motivation for why people pull away. Sure, we've talked about mismatched expectations, but what causes this lack of communication from the person pulling away? And for that, I'd like to turn to attachment theory. I got really interested in this idea of how attachment theory essentially requires us to put people in these 4 boxes. You're either anxious, you're either dismissive avoidant, you're fearful avoidant, or you're secure. And then based on where you are placed in these boxes, we can explain away your behaviors. And yes, I've been guilty of doing this myself. It's easy to point to the person who's pulling away and say, oh, see, look, they're avoidant. That's why they're pulling away. But I'm not sure that's the right way of viewing attachment theory as a whole. Look at this. This is a quote I found from the Happiness Clinic. Traditionally, attachment styles were viewed as rigid constructs, but contemporary research has unveiled a dynamic truth. Attachment styles are fluid. And that makes sense. This means that someone who had a great childhood, who grew up in a secure environment, can still end up with an insecure attachment given the right circumstances. Maybe this secure person is cheated on. They develop avoidance as a coping mechanism. Maybe they have the opposite reaction and constantly seek reassurance, becoming more anxious. My interview last year with Dr. Garrison was really illuminating on this topic.
When you think about avoidant is anxiety, really, because anxiety is built around the concept of avoidance. We can't be anxious and not avoid. It just comes with the territory.
All right, so basically everyone has a different coping mechanism for how they deal with anxiety. Let's go look at the graphic I created earlier for this video. Something is causing the person who pulled away from you anxiety. That is why they're pulling away. And they cope with it by doing an avoidant thing, pulling away. This offers them some relief. But this action creates a chain reaction that maybe they weren't expecting it to have. You, feeling rejected, like you aren't good enough, become anxious, and you go into problem-solving mode. So you get them a gift. You plead with them to come back. You tell them your feelings, which in turn gives them more anxiety, causing them to pull away even more, causing you to double down, and the cycle repeats until eventually they leave or you give up. So how do we break this cycle? What actually works? I'm going to say something controversial. I think a lot of YouTube has become about doing two things really well. Number one, you say the most controversial thing possible to generate the most clicks. And number two, you essentially say the thing that people want to hear, even when you know it's not best for them. Neither of these approaches are going to help you. Now, if you're caught in this push-pull cycle and you're going to YouTube and you're searching for advice on how you can pull them back in, that gives me an interesting data point. You are likely stuck in an anxious state. So what you really need to be doing is trying to find a way to get out of the anxious state. Now, why? Well, it was Albert Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. They pull away, you get anxious and shower them with love. This inevitably causes them to pull away again, and this behavior is cyclical. It happens over and over and over. Because of your anxiety, you can't stop showering them with love, hoping beyond hope that they wake up and see your value. But each time you let your anxiety take control, each time you tell them that you love them, try to plead with them, buy them gifts, call them, text them, you push them away and dig yourself in a deeper hole. Think of it like this. Every time you repeat this cycle, every time you essentially beg for them back, the odds of them coming back are lower. So every time they push you away and you react anxiously, it just digs you into a deeper hole. The main goal here should always be for you to find a way to deal with your extreme anxiety about someone rejecting you or pulling away from you. Okay, but how do you do that? Well, here's my problem. There's so much noise online. I'll give you an example. You're struggling. Your partner's pulling away, you're increasingly getting desperate. So you buy into my idea that you need to be less anxious. So you go to Google and you type in, what will help me become less anxious? And up comes this list. Talk to someone you trust. Try to manage your worries. Look after your physical health. Try breathing exercises. Keep a diary. Complementary and alternative therapies. Again, it's all technically good advice. I've talked about this a lot in other videos, but are you actually going to take the advice? I mean, if you are super honest with yourself, are you going to look at that list and say, I'm going to make a change right now? Google is a great tool. Don't get me wrong. But my issue with listicles like this is that by condensing something as complicated as becoming less anxious down into a list of 6 items, it makes it seem like achieving a balanced and more effective life is simple, straightforward, which in turn sets unrealistic expectations. There it is again. Mismatched expectations. The subtext, whether you're aware of it or not, is that by displaying a simple list, is that the problem is simple to solve. And right off the bat, it sets you up for disappointment and discouragement if your progress isn't immediate. I'm going to tell you a story. When I first started coaching people, I would put all of my notes in a notebook. This notebook. This was my very first coaching client ever. Now, here's what I want to draw your attention to. Look at all of the things I recommended to this client after the call. Stop psychic readings, set boundaries, have conditions to take their ex back, define what those boundaries are. There needs to be some consequences for the ex's laziness. Figure out what those consequences need to be. Find a therapist. Now, all of this was supposed to be homework. Well, it turns out that individual booked a follow-up call a couple of weeks later. Guess how much homework they had actually completed? None. They had done nothing. And it's my fault. You see, my mistake was I gave them too much advice at once. You see, it's a myth that we are able to multitask. The human mind and brain lack the architecture to perform 2 or more tasks simultaneously. And the first lesson I learned from coaching individuals is that you never give someone more than one simple goal to accomplish, preferably something they can actually accomplish to build their confidence up and build momentum. Otherwise, they shut down. They become a slave to over-information. So your person is pulling away. Internally, you want them to stop pulling away and start coming back. And now I've made the argument that by becoming less anxious, it'll likely give you the best chance of achieving that goal. So the real question is, what one thing can you do to help you achieve that state? You see, for me, it's about finding some sort of anchoring mechanism to bring you back within yourself, to reprioritize your life. I've talked about this in the past before, but I like to view all relationship as existing in a type of solar system. Now, here's what someone's solar system is supposed to look like. There's you, where the sun is, and then there's all the other planets in your solar system that are revolving around your sun. You know, you have your parents, your friends, your significant others. Hey, there's your work. Hey, there's your dog. And there is supposed to be your magnum opus. The problem is that when you are stuck in a situation where someone pulls away from you, someone rejects you, and it sort of displaces you from your own solar system, and suddenly you start revolving around their sun, their solar system. And the more you try, the more you get rejected by them, the more you continue to get stuck in their solar system. It's the sunk cost fallacy, which, if you didn't know, describes our tendency to follow through on an endeavor if we have already invested time, effort, or money into it, whether or not the current costs outweigh the benefits. So you've invested all of this time, effort, money, if you bought gifts, into attempting to make this person realize that they are the one for you. Your time has to be worth something. It can't be for nothing. And so months go by, and you find yourself still stuck, revolving around them. Other relationship opportunities, they just don't do it for you. Your friends who are tempting you to go out with them, well, you turn those invitations down for fear of making your person go mad, even though you're not together. Something has to change. Let's point back at that Albert Einstein quote. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. Now, I'm not sure if you realize this or not, but what I've just described is the very definition of a codependent relationship, and it's not healthy. So how do you fix this? How do you find that anchoring mechanism that I talked about earlier? Well, let's talk a little bit about time for a moment. Time is the one resource that you have that is constantly ticking away. According to this Medium article, the average human lives 80 years, or 29,000 days, or 696,000 hours. When you choose to spend an hour on something, you spend it. That's it. You do not get it back. But it's really not 696,000 hours. There's this really great video done on this channel called Z Frank, where this guy basically counts out the average days an American lives based on jelly beans. So the guy basically goes on to argue that 8,477 days will be spent sleeping, 1,635 days eating, 3,202 days working, 2,676 days watching TV, 564 days caring for those we love, 671 days spent bathing and grooming ourselves, 720 days based on civic duty and religion. That leaves us with a grand total of only 12,690 days, or 304,000 hours. But here's the one thing the Jelly Bean video does not cover. What about the quality of those hours being spent? What about those hours that you're sitting back, doing nothing but obsessing about this person who's pulling away from you? This person who doesn't love you back the way you love them? The hours spent on indecision, waiting around for someone who's constantly pulling away. In an odd way, those hours are spent without you actively choosing to spend them. Here's my point. Rather than investing your precious hours in someone else's solar system, why not invest them into your own solar system? Invest them into something that gives your life meaning, that sets your soul on fire. For me, for my solar system, that has always been this focus on this idea of a magnum opus. I'm a writer. I write. It's probably my very best skill. So when I'm not working, when I'm not spending time with my family or taking care of my physical health, I'm always spending it on my magnum opus, the thing I want to be remembered for. A story I wrote called The Dark Pulse. For you, though, your magnum opus, it can be anything. And the beauty of it is you are spending your precious hours in your solar system, not the solar system of the object of your affection. And by doing this, by making this simple change, it has this profound impact on the person who's pulling away from you. They wake up one day only to realize you've stopped chasing them. They get curious. They see you're investing time not in their solar system anymore, but in your solar system. And that is when the attraction begins to kickstart again for them.